Kevin Costner spent 40 years playing men who never flinched. Cowboys who rode into danger without looking back. Heroes who stood alone when every person around them had already walked away. Fathers who sacrificed everything for the people they loved. Audiences trusted that face, that calm and unhurried voice that made even silence feel like it carried weight. But the man behind those performances carried something the cameras never fully caught. A private grief that grew heavier with every passing year, shaped by 2 marriages, 6 children, and a love life far more complicated than any script he ever read. At 68, after his second marriage collapsed in a very public and painful way, Costner said something in an interview that stopped people cold. He wasn't promoting Yellowstone or his long-awaited film Horizon. He was talking about a woman, and what he said about her revealed more about who Kevin Costner really is than anything he has ever put on screen. Kevin Costner was born on January 18, 1955, in Linwood, California, the youngest of 3 boys raised by William and Sharon Costner. The family didn't have much money, and they moved often, spending stretches of time in small towns like Compton and Ventura. He wasn't the fastest kid or the most confident one in any room. He liked to be alone, to write, to think things through quietly instead of talking them out. While other kids chased the usual teenage dreams, Kevin sat by himself and wrote poems, stared out at open spaces, and felt something pulling him steadily toward a life he couldn't yet name. At California State University Fullerton, he studied business because it seemed like the responsible choice, but his heart was never in the numbers. What he actually wanted was to tell stories, to stand in front of a camera and make people feel something genuine. A chance conversation on a small plane changed the direction of everything. He told a man sitting beside him that he wanted to act, and that man, who worked in the film industry, gave him a simple nudge to go for it. Costner had no connections, no money backing him, and no one clearing a path ahead. He drove trucks, worked on fishing boats, and gave tours at movie studios while spending his evenings in acting classes. His face didn't even make the final cut of The Big Chill, a film where he appeared as a dead character. But the director remembered him, and that quiet persistence eventually opened a door. Silverado arrived in 1985, and for the first time, Hollywood genuinely took notice. 2 years later, The Untouchables placed him alongside Sean Connery and Robert De Niro, and Costner held his ground without blinking. Bull Durham followed in 1988, then Field of Dreams in 1989, and with each release, audiences recognized something consistent in him, a quality that felt grounded, honest, and deeply rooted in the American experience. Dances with Wolves, released in 1990, was the moment that permanently defined him. Costner didn't just star in it. He directed it too, pouring everything he had into a story about Native Americans told with real patience and care. The industry warned him loudly it would fail. It was too long, too quiet, too different from what studios were willing to greenlight at the time. None of that mattered, because the film won 7 Academy Awards, including Best Director and Best Picture. He had placed the biggest gamble of his career on a project the industry dismissed, and walked away with Hollywood's highest honors. The boy who grew up moving between small California towns had made it all the way, and he had done it without compromise. None of that success touched what was quietly happening in his personal life. Back in 1975, before any of the fame reached him, Costner met a woman named Cindy Silva on a college campus. She was smart, kind, and beautiful, in a way that made him want to be better simply by being near her. He once said she was everything he admired in a woman, and that when she agreed to go out with him, he felt genuinely proud, not like a movie star, but like an ordinary man who had somehow gotten lucky. They married in 1978, and for years, Cindy held the household together, while Kevin chased auditions that mostly led nowhere. She believed in him when the industry didn't. And then the industry did, and everything began to shift. Fame brought temptation and growing distance, and after 16 years and 3 children, Annie, Lily, and Joe, their marriage ended in 1994. The settlement reached $80 million, but as Costner later admitted, the emotional cost was something no figure could properly measure. He had built his entire public image around loyalty and quiet strength, and then watched his own family come apart behind closed doors. The years that followed were unsteady. He dated Bridget Rooney and their relationship produced his son Liam in 1996, though the romance didn't hold. Elle Macpherson entered his life that same year, and he spoke openly about her, calling her smart, kind, and his equal in every way. But by the end of 1996, it was already over. His films weren't steadying things either. Waterworld became one of Hollywood's most notorious box office failures. The Postman performed even worse. The man who had once commanded every room he walked into was drifting now, professionally and personally, with no solid anchor in sight. Even a casual remark from Ben Affleck, who mentioned that Costner seemed uncertain whether he remembered working with him on Field of Dreams, quietly hinted at how disconnected he had become from the world around him. Christine Baumgartner came into his life in 1998. She was a fashion model and handbag designer, 20 years younger than him, and something about her presence settled him in a way he hadn't experienced in years. They dated, split in 2002, and then found their way back to each other. In 2004, they married at his ranch in Aspen, Colorado, and built a life together that produced 3 children, Caden, Hayes, and Grace. For nearly 2 decades, Costner appeared to be a man who had finally found solid ground. Yellowstone brought his career roaring back to cultural relevance, and Horizon, a sweeping western he had dreamed of making for years, was finally moving toward production. From the outside, everything looked right. Then in May 2023, Christine filed for divorce. After 18 years of marriage, she walked away, and by all accounts, Costner was blindsided. There had been no visible cracks, no public arguments, and no warning signs that journalists or fans had picked up on. People close to him said the real problem was time, specifically the relentless amount of it that Yellowstone and Horizon had consumed, pulling him away from home until too much space had grown between them. Those who knew him said he would have done anything to save the marriage, and when he spoke about it on CBS, the pain behind his measured words was impossible to miss. He kept working, kept showing up for his children, but something in him was quieter now, more guarded than the man audiences had watched for decades. And then came the detail that made everything worse. Months after the divorce was finalized, Christine was seen with Josh Connor, a man who had been a longtime friend and neighbor of Kevin's, someone both of them had known and trusted for years. A source close to Costner described his reaction plainly, saying he felt as though he had been stabbed in the back. Losing a marriage is painful enough. Losing it to someone you once called a friend produces a different kind of wound, one that sits deeper and takes far longer to close. In the quiet that followed all of it, Costner reached back toward the one person who had known him before any of this began. Cindy Silva re-entered his life, not as a romantic possibility, but as someone who simply understood the shape of him, who had been present when the future was still uncertain and the love between them was uncomplicated by fame or money or competing ambitions. They talked, slowly at first, then more regularly, sharing memories of the children they had raised together and the early years when neither of them had anything except each other. Costner found genuine comfort in those conversations. He had wondered, in his more vulnerable moments, whether something might be rebuilt between them. But Cindy had long since remarried and built a full life of her own. That door was clearly closed, and in time he accepted it. What remained was a friendship, quiet and honest. And inside that friendship, he found something he hadn't expected to discover so soon after the collapse of his second marriage, a fragile but real sense of peace. At 68, Kevin Costner isn't rushing toward anything new. His attention rests on his 6 children and on Horizon, the project that has consumed years of his creative energy and personal resources. He remains open to love, according to those closest to him, not desperately searching for it but not closing the door on it either. Rumors about him and singer Jewel surfaced and spread quickly, but Costner addressed them directly, making clear they had never been romantically involved. He has lived through 2 divorces, built careers and families across completely different chapters of his life, watched Hollywood transform all around him, and kept moving forward regardless. The scars from what happened with Christine are still fresh, but the man carrying them is still standing, still working, and still, in his own quiet way, hopeful.